Welcome to my show. This is Tony Byrne presenting Money Demystified, the show to make your money grow, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. here on Spectrum on Air, the colour of radio. Today we're going to talk about all things to do with financial well-being with Chris Budd. So, welcome to today's show, Chris. Chris Budd, the founder of the Initiative Financial Wellbeing. Chris is proudly an ex-independent financial advisor, having given up the face-to-face advising role 5 years ago. Welcome to today's show, Chris. We're very delighted to have you here as our guest speaker today.
Thank you, Tony. Very nice to be here.
Brilliant. Okay. So to kick off with, this is the sort of thing I ask all our guests. Can you tell me a bit about your background, your growing up, your family, your kind of education before you started working?
Sure. So I grew up in North Somerset. I consider myself a Bristolian, but I actually grew up in North Somerset. One of the things about people who live in Somerset is you think everybody comes from Somerset drinks cider, right? But actually we don't, because what we do is when we're 15, we go down to the local farm and you buy scrumpy that he makes himself. And then you're heartily sick on it and you never touch the stuff ever again.
I remember drinking scrumpy myself when I was about 16. Yeah.
Well, it's dangerous stuff because it tastes like orange squash or apple juice. It's just lovely. And then suddenly you realise 3 pints later and the world's a very different place. So, yeah, that was that was part of my childhood. Very much a cricket man. So I played a lot of cricket in Somerset and still do, and I'm a cricket coach. Now live just a few miles from where I grew up. Didn't mean to do that, but somehow it happened. With my family, kids just leaving home now. And, with a lot of well-being.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, so what kind of education did you have? Did you go to a state school or private school? Or?
I made the biggest mistake of my life. And I always tell council people this because I went to a state school in North Somerset and then I went to university. And when I went to university, I didn't know what subject to take because like a lot of people of 18, didn't know what to do with my life. So talking to my parents and talking to my teachers and the head of sixth form, and everybody asked me the same thing. They said, well, what are you good at? And so I did economics because my dad thought that would be a good job, lead to a good job, etc. It was like a deal we made that I didn't want to do accountancy, so he allowed me to do economics. And I absolutely hated it because I realized that economics as a study is completely nonsense. It's complete nonsense. It's just all made up on assumptions and I absolutely hated every moment of my degree. And of course, the question that my parents and everybody else should have asked me is, what do you enjoy?
Yes.
And had I done that, I probably would have done English literature or journalism or something along those lines. But they didn't. They asked me, what are you good at? And so my life took a particular turn. And that's cool. We are where we are and we learn from it. But that is something, the other thing I didn't realize as well, which I think people are a lot better at these days, it never occurred to me that I could have changed my course.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So I was just kind of quite passive and went through it. But there we go. We live and we learn. So a degree in economics, which taught me an awful lot about economics, mainly what a load of old rubbish it is.
Yes, it's a very good point that, because I didn't go to university myself, but we do have a mature ex-student, a graduate, who's worked for us for the last 2 years, and he says exactly the same thing as you. He says that he's even questioned his own lecturer, saying that what you're teaching us is all theory. This doesn't work in the real world, because he did a financial degree as well, and they agreed, and they said, you're right, but we have to teach it.
Yeah, that's not what you're here for. Yeah, absolutely. I had exactly the same experience. There was a thing called indifference curves, which is a microeconomics principle. And indifference curves are all about the relationship between two products and how they're used at a price point and this kind of stuff. And in my second year, the first lecture, the lecturer put up these indifference curves and said, this is an indifference curve between cider and wine and chortle, because you're students, this kind of thing. And so he put this curve up, and somebody put their hand up, and they said, sir, I actually drink beer. And everybody laughs, and he said, yeah, very good, but this is between cider and wine. And the guy persisted and said, no, but I actually do drink beer, so how does that apply to me? And the lecturer slightly impatiently put the chalk down, because that's how old I am. It was chalk on a chalkboard. put the chalk down, turned around and said, right, let's get something straight. Both you and I know that none of this has any practical application in the real world, but that will not help you to pass your degree. So just listen to what I say and repeat it in the exam.
Oh, wow.
I was done. I was finished then. I had to go 2 more years, and at that point I should have changed.
Yeah, good point. Still, we can learn through adversity, can't we?
Absolutely.
So Chris, a very interesting background. So what was your first job?
Oh, I had a few fun jobs, actually. I worked in a mushroom farm, local mushroom farm, picking mushrooms. I worked at Sainsbury's. I was the guy that made the mince. Little tip, by the way, everybody, don't buy cheap minced meat. I know what goes in it because I used to have to make it at 8 o'clock every Saturday morning. It's not pleasant. Always buy steak mince. And then I got a temping job with an insurance company that you might remember, or a pension company called Sun Life. With really good company. And my father was a financial advisor. And so I got a job there and a temping job. My job as a temp, I was one of the few people that would actually ask questions. Is a tip for young people listening to this. If you're doing a job, ask why. Why do we have to? I was photocopying something. What is this that I'm photocopying? And nobody else in that office. They were all admin people who were just bored, you know. And so I asked questions, and I was then put in charge because I was, you know, maybe a bit too eager. Put in charge of the computerization of the sales force's bonuses.
Oh.
And I remember distinctly going through, because this is in the days where they would be written down on a piece of paper from the branch and posted to head office, which we would then process. And I was looking at the numbers and thinking, I'm doing the wrong job here. I want that job. So I went and did that job. What you'll understand as a broker consultant. I went to be one of those, a glorified rep, really. So I saw what they earned. And I thought, well, I'll just do that then. One thing leads to another.
And did that work well for you?
I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. Met a lot of interesting people. I learned a lot about what not to do.
Yes.
In the world of financial advice, because back in this would have been early 90s, it was cowboy country, really, financial advice.
Absolutely.
So I learned an awful lot about how not to give advice and how not to treat clients very well.
Yeah, that's terrible. At least it's improved a lot since then.
Massively.
That's really good. So what made you start your first business? And was this as an IFA, as an independent financial advisor? It
was, yeah. And I wish I hadn't. To be perfectly, I started my first business because I wanted to be a financial advisor. I had a job. I wanted to move back to Bristol, but I couldn't find anybody who would allow me to do the job the way I thought it should be done.
Right.
I.e., I wanted to do the job charging time, not taking upfront commissions for things. I wanted to do the job about planning and helping people about their future, whereas every single job I went to had targets for how many products you could sell. The reason I started my own business is because I couldn't find anybody to employ me the way I wanted to do the job. I had 2 really difficult years, really horrible years, like in the supermarket, having to leave the shopping behind because my credit card had maxed out and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, in many ways, I would much rather have found a company that I really liked and worked for them, but I couldn't.
So you did that for quite a number of years, I believe.
Yeah, I ran Ovation Finance for 20 years, and then I sold it in 2018, a majority of it to something called an employee ownership trust.
Oh, great. Okay. So you've still got a position, I believe, in that firm or a similar firm, don't you?
I do, yeah. I'm chair of Ovation still, although, yeah, chair of Ovation, not involved day to day, and I'm also non-executive of a couple of other companies as well.
Okay, great. Now, we're going to come on to ask about this initiative of financial well-being, but just before we do that, what is financial well-being as opposed to what you did before, financial advising or financial planning? So what is financial well-being and why is it so important to you? Why are you so passionate about it?
It started with a conversation with my wife as we were driving, and she was telling me all about the work that she was doing as a cancer nurse.
Yes.
And she got a second job with a charity called the Penny Bron Cancer Centre, BROHN, just outside Bristol.
Yes.
And what they do is they help you to live well with cancer. And it's all about lifestyle prescribing. It's about mindfulness. It's about eating well. And it's the science behind it that helps you while you're having your chemotherapy, helps your body to help itself. And it's a fascinating subject, and I recommend anybody interested in that to go and check out the Penny Bron website. But as she was telling me about this, about how we have these cells in our body that can actually literally fight the cancerous cells and how we can help those cells to be strong, I said, well, actually, here's the thing. One of the biggest causes of stress is money.
Yes.
So maybe I should write a book called How Financial Planning Can Prevent Cancer. Yes. And she looked at me and said, I'm not actually sure you'd get away with that. So instead, I came up with this name, financial well-being, and I literally did invent the words financial well-being.
Wow.
And I Googled the term, and there was 2 uses of the word. That's it, on the Google search, there's 2 uses of the term financial well-being. So the joke is, I say, I invented financial well-being. I just didn't know that 2 other people had invented it before me. One of them was a really good book I'd recommend called Wellbeing by Rathan Harter, summary of Gallup surveys on well-being, and the other one was a Barclays report about employee well-being. So I wrote this book called the Financial Wellbeing Book. We also do a podcast, 75 or so episodes in over 5 years, called imaginatively the Financial Wellbeing Podcast. And it just started me researching the relationship between money and happiness. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. What is financial well-being? It's about the relationship between money and happiness, how we can use our money to be happier, not just wealthier.
Okay, we'll expand on this a bit more in the next part of the show. We're coming near the end of the first section, but just in the last minute or so before we go to the break, why did you form the Initiative of Financial Wellbeing? And why is it the initiative and not the institute?
That's teasing. So I formed it because I want to provide a meeting place for like-minded financial advisors, people to come together who also believe that money isn't just about, financial planning isn't just about investments and money, it's about being happy. I then put a press release out that said, who would like to join me if I set up an Institute of Financial Wellbeing? I thought I might have 20 or 30 people. I had 430 people respond. Absolutely blew me away. Nice. So I then went to a solicitor and said, could you set up a not-for-profit company called the Institute of Financial Wellbeing? And he said, no, because you have to have the permission of the Secretary of State to call yourself an institute. So that was a bit awkward. So I cheekily called it the Initiative for Financial Wellbeing so that I could call it IFW and nobody would notice my cock up.
Well done, Chris. Great initiative you showed there. I've been fascinated by your background and how you used the real initiative to, forgive the pun, for creating the initiative of
the IFW. Let's just call it IFW, and no one will know.
So just find out a little bit more about yourself, because our listeners always like to know that. So what do you do to relax or switch off? What do you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Well, cricket is a big part of my life. I'm a cricket coach, and one of the things that I'm proudest of the various things I've done in life is when my kids were coming of the suitable age about 10 years ago, I started a youth section at my local cricket club. At the time, the club had about 20 members. That was all, no youth section. So I went to schools and got a few kids together, etc. And slowly but surely, we got a youth section going. And now on Friday nights, we have 170 kids coming down to play cricket every Friday night. And I'm as proud of that as anything else I've done in life. I obviously had help after a few years. Other people got involved, a guy called David Lloyd particularly, and we built it up together. But yeah, that's something I'm hugely proud of. But I still play cricket very badly and at a very low level, but I still love it.
That's brilliant. I always feel it's important to have something not work-related, something completely different to take your mind off the day-to-day sort of pressures, which is why you're into financial well-being, clearly.
Yeah, the other thing as well I would just say is I also write novels. So 10 years ago, more than that maybe, I started taking Wednesdays off work, and every Wednesday I write fiction, and I published 3 novels now. The third one, The Vanishing Point, was out recently, and I'm working on the 4th. So that's a big part of my life. That's a big part of my thinking life. If ever I'm out with a dog or what have you, and my brain wants to go somewhere, I send it off to have a little think about that stuff.
No, that's really good writing. I've always felt that everybody's got a book in them, and most people underestimate their abilities and the interest people would show in it, because every book someone writes, well, what I'm talking about non-fiction now, I suppose, is a historical account, isn't it? And you know, there's always something that you might not think is interesting about your life, but you're still giving a historical account. And even in fiction, you're probably drawing on real world, aren't you, experiences to create your fiction.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of fiction, of course, and there's memoirs and, you know, all sorts of stuff. The thing is about a novel is it's a very complicated thing to do and to get right, which is why it's so interesting. And I spend years, I mean, I published 3 novels in 10 years. I spent 3 years working on a novel. I'd write 7 drafts at least of each one, and I rewrite constantly. And I'm proud of them, and I think they're all right. In fact, one of the things I find quite fascinating is that everybody assumes that if they know you and you've published a novel, it must be rubbish. It's because if I don't know anybody that's famous or that's written novels, so if I know you, it must be rubbish. And the most common comment I get from people who I know who've read my novels is, do you know, it was actually really quite good.
That's really encouraging to hear that. So Chris, do you have a role model? Who's inspired you the most to become who you are today?
Quite a few, but if I were to pick one, I'd go for Spike Milligan.
Really?
Spike Milligan was a man who didn't take any prisoners. You knew what he thought, always. And I'm not quite as brave as him, but his honesty and integrity is something that I've always admired and looked up to.
That's interesting, very interesting. I was just thinking of him as a comedian, but you could see him as far more than that.
Yeah, he was on, some of your older listeners will remember a talk show called Wogan, and he was on that quite a few times, and he was often quite abrasive and quite difficult.
Yes.
But it's because he believed in things. So and he was chair of the Noise Abatement Society. And I remember Wogan saying to it, he had a few drinks at this particular interview. You know, you could tell he was a little bit tipsy. And Wogan said to him, you know, Spike, you're chairman of the Noise Abatement Society. Why is that? And Spike Milligan talked about background noise and background music, particularly being intensely annoying. And Wogan said, yes, I do get that, Spike, but did you really have to rip the speaker off the wall of the lift just because it was playing lobby music? And I thought, good on you, Spike, good on you. I'm not that brave, but good on you.
I think he would have a hard time coping today, wouldn't he? Because
go to cricket matches and the music they play, it drives me absolutely crazy. I don't go to T20 matches because it's just so annoying. But hey, that's a bee in my bonnet.
But wouldn't he have trouble voicing his own opinion these days?
I think his opinions are probably okay. I think you only have a problem voicing your opinion if your opinion is unpleasant.
Yes.
You know, we could get in a very interesting discussion about freedom and rights here, which I have a lot of thoughts. But if you find lots of people react really badly to an opinion that you've got, maybe it's because your opinion isn't very nice.
Yes, that's true. Chris, apart from your own books, and I would urge listeners to, you know, go on to Amazon and look up you, Chris Budd, and find out the books you've written. Apart from your own books, which other books would you recommend reading?
Well, I'll do one fiction and one non-fiction. My favourite fiction book is called I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. An absolutely delightful and gorgeous story of a teenage girl and love. I've read it several times. I'm also a massive Louis de Bernier fan as well. Birds Without Wings, if you want something gritty and war and really quite hard. But the book that changed my life is a book called The Long Walk by Slavomir Rabic.
Oh, okay.
And the story is that I was doing a job. You asked earlier on about setting up my own business. This is what started it. I was working for a pension company. I was pretty unhappy. I was drinking too much in my mid-20s. And I read this book about a Polish war officer who gets arrested after the First World War and sent to a Siberian camp. And I'm giving nothing away because it's the title of the book.
Yes.
And of course, he wrote it, so he survives. But he and several others escaped from the prisoner of war camp and walked 5,000 miles across the Gobi Desert and the Himalayas. Wow. And it's an extraordinary, true story. And I was sitting on Rains Park train station finishing it in literally floods of tears. And you can probably tell in my voice, it still gets me now, in floods of tears. And I thought to myself, if he can do that, why can't I just leave this job and go set up my own business? Why am I doing what I'm doing? If he can go through all of that
Yes.
And so for many, many years, whenever somebody new joined Ovation, I always gave them a copy of that book.
Wow.
And not all read it, but most did, because it genuinely changed my life. And there's not many things that you can say that about, other.
Oh, that sounds astounding, really. So you haven't really, I don't think, given us enough not reason, but enough information, I feel, yet on financial well-being as opposed to how financial planning is practiced these days. Although I do understand that a lot of your members are actually financial planning. They're still doing financial planning, but they incorporate financial well-being into their practice. Is that correct by interpretation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the IFW, but we also have the Financial Wellbeing podcast and some workplace stuff. So I do a lot with the public as well. Look, the bottom line is that research tells us, we know that if you are a person who sees money as an objective, if you are a person who sees the accumulation of assets, thank you very much, Luna, that's a little dog just saying hello. If you're a person who sees material possessions as an objective, you will be less happy than you would otherwise be, right? We know that.
Yeah.
Research tells us that. So why are we spending our time trying to accumulate wealth? What is the purpose of it? What is wealth for? So that's what financial well-being is all about. It's about getting the research out of the relationship between money and happiness. And you will know, Tony, if you do a good cash flow forecast, if you do financial planning for somebody and you help somebody to work out, well, what actually will make me happy in life? And how much money do I need to achieve that? They almost always need less money than they thought they did.
True.
So that's what financial well-being is, and I'm happy to go into as much detail. I can talk about hours on this subject. It's so fascinating. But that, in a nutshell, it's all about the study of the relationship between money and happiness.
Isn't the problem these days, Chris, and I think you've touched on this in some information I've read about you, that the problem is all we ever measure is economic measures like GDP, gross domestic product. What about measuring the happiness of your population? Isn't that more important than just money itself, which is just cool?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's an organization that I was a director of and trustee of for a few years called the Centre for Thriving Places. And they do fascinating stuff about measuring well-being in an economy and in a workplace. And there's a really good point that they make is that I look out to my left. I live in Somerset and I live on the edge of a village, and there's a field here and there's a massive big oak tree. Beautiful, huge oak tree, been there for I don't know how many decades. What's the value of that oak tree to the economy? Absolutely nothing until it's chopped down.
Yes.
So why are we measuring economic activity as a measure of whether we're doing well as a society? We're measuring the wrong thing.
Yes.
There's a famous quote from Bobby Kennedy back in the 60s on this, something on the lines of GDP measures everything except that which matters. If we throw more rubbish away, if we consume more and throw more rubbish away, GDP goes up. And yet we're helping to contribute to potentially the extinction of humanity and climate change and all that stuff. So we're measuring the wrong thing. So we should be measuring well-being, and we should be measuring, government should be measuring the impact of their policies by measuring, are they making us happier? And the Centre of Thriving Places provides all of that.
It's a very good point, because my observation from people I know, people that in my life I've come into or I've worked with or live with, the people from third world countries, lesser developed countries, generally speaking, they seem to be happier. Their family seems to have much more of, togetherness. They help each other out. They're happier. They've got less money. But money seems to be the least important thing in their lives. Everything else makes them happy. And I find that quite humbling.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
something we're losing in the West.
I think so. And if you look at there's various different measures of happiness in countries, and the States and the UK, we have the lowest levels of well-being in the world, along with a few other countries. But we are, near the bottom. And everything about our society aims to make that worse. So you take advertising, for example. The point of advertising is to make you unhappy. in order that you buy the product to get your happiness back up again. And I can explain the theory behind it's called set point theory, and I can explain the theory behind that if you're interested. But everything, there's so much pressure on it. Wolf of Wall Street and Dragon's Den, all of this stuff is making money as the object, and that makes us less happy. So in many ways, what I'm trying to do with the financial well-being stuff is to get people to look back onto the stuff that does make them happy.
Very good point, Chris. Very, very good. We're about to end this section of the show now, which is being Chris's present. We covered his early life in the first part. And in the last section of the show, we're going to go on to Chris's future and the future of financial well-being. So thanks for your time so far, Chris. Very welcome to hear a completely different view to the norm. So, Chris, we're now going to talk about the future, your life and the future of financial well-being. So how do you envisage your life panning out over the next 10 years and beyond?
Oh, my goodness. To make it would be good enough. I adopted a policy a few years ago to say yes to everything. That's why we're talking today, goes on this, because you kindly got in touch. Yeah, right. I don't know what it's all about, but I'll do it. And that's led me to some very interesting places. Yeah. And you see a lot of advice from kind of lifestyle gurus, etc., to make sure you say no to. No, I disagree. Say yes to everything and just see where it takes you. And I have an overarching purpose of my life, of my professional life at least, which is all about helping to this thing around money and happiness. So, for example, my day job that I get paid for is advising business owners on how to succession into an employee ownership trust. I was one of the first people to do it. I'm one of the, I like to say I'm one of the UK's experts, but there's only about 5 of us, so that's not such a big statement. I'm a big fish in a pond. But that is also, I'm such a believer in that, because that's about sharing the profit with all the employees. Yes. And it's all in the same purposeful area about what we currently have as a hugely poor distribution of wealth amongst the planet, the countries, and then the individuals. And so I love that kind of stuff, and I'll carry on working in anything that gets me into those sorts of areas, because that gives me meaning and purpose in my life, which is a big part of financial well-being. I'm by no means wealthy. I sold my business, but not for a life-changing, retirement type sum. So I still need to work, still need to earn. And so I'd make sure I do it in areas that give me meaning and purpose. So
that's a kind of common theme of some of the guests we've had on here, mainly possibly because we tend to interview more enlightened ones, dare I say. But that's a common thread that comes through, that the people I've been interviewing don't really envisage ever retiring. Are you one of that category?
I would say so, yeah. What do I do? What is retirement? It doesn't mean anything. There's an age concern, not to me anyway, there's an age concern survey which asked retired people, were they living a life of well-being and what was making them happy? And overwhelmingly, the answer came back that people who were retired who reported high well-being were people who were living a life of meaning and purpose.
Yes.
So when you come up towards retirement, you've got a group of people that you work with probably, you've got connections and contacts, you've got something that you do that hopefully makes you happy, you're using your skills and knowledge, and then you retire and all of that disappears. All of those things that contribute to your well-being just suddenly stop. So the process of moving towards retirement for me should be a process about how to replace all of those things.
Yes, and don't you also find, I mentioned poorer countries and third world countries, and less developed countries, but the other thing you notice in these countries is that older people are respected as very wise. I don't get that impression in this country that that's the case.
Well, I think that's because quite a lot of them are proving that they're not.
Good point.
Yeah, so no, I think I'll leave that one there. I might get myself into trouble.
Well, put it this way: someone who, like you, who's living a meaningful life and is, I expect, learning more day by day into your later life. Surely you're becoming wiser, healthier, and happier, aren't you?
That's not for me to say, but I think you have two ways of going through life. You either think you're right and reject everything else, or you think you're wrong and listen to everything else. And I always tried to be the latter.
Yes.
There's various part of financial well-being and money and happiness is about our behavioral biases.
Yes.
And there's this thing called Kolb's cycle of learning, which describes how we develop our value set and how we develop our knowledge, but particularly values and beliefs. And what happens is we have an experience, something happens to us. As a result of that, we draw some form of a conclusion, we have a learning, and then we try and apply that, which creates another experience. And so we go round in circles where we have experiences, we draw a conclusion, we test it out, that's a new opinion. Now, what happens there, and that's how we develop our beliefs. And what is really key about this is to understand is that beliefs are not truths. Yes. Just because I happen to believe something to be true doesn't mean that it is. So let's take the obvious example over the last 5 years, Brexit. Now, on the one hand, you've got people who believe that leaving the European Union is absolutely the best thing for this country. And you've got other people who equally adamant that staying in the European Union is the best thing for this country. But neither of them have any information upon which to base that opinion, because we don't know what the future is going to hold. No. But it doesn't stop them having them deeply, aggressively sometimes held views. So as soon as you start to unravel this stuff and go backwards through that, and you say, well, what was the action that happened or the experience that led me to that belief? What have happened if it happened a different way? Could I have had a different belief?
Yes.
You start to open your mind and you start to realize if my beliefs are not true, I need to test some of these things and find out other beliefs and other truths. And then you learn, and that's how you learn. So I find that when I first read about Kolb's cycle of learning, it was a big change for me of saying, I've got to stop telling everybody what's what, and I've got to start listening a bit more.
It's a really good point. Ray Daddy, I don't know if you read any of his stuff, he talks about the blind spots we've all got. We all probably think we know things, but it's not until you listen to other people and give their perspective. And if you're prepared to be thoughtful and listen to them, you'll find they've got insights you didn't realise, and so you can learn from them. I think being able to listen and learn from other people and really think about it. I find that, I don't know about you, I find not enough people really deeply think about things because we live in a very instant society now, don't we? Especially with the internet and social media. I get the impression, certainly from my own millennial children, that they don't really think deeply or research things. They just take instant messaging from the social media, I find quite often, and I find that a bit surprising, to say the least.
I think there's some truth in that with some people. I mean, I know plenty of people, young people, who do think deeply. So, coming along to the financial well-being stuff,
yes.
The IFW, we've got lots of young members, and they're hugely thoughtful and really fantastic young people, making a real big difference in society. The trouble is, of course, a lot of those sort of closed-minded people you're describing, we see on social media, and they tend to be pretty loud. And some of them, I'm not going to give them any airtime by mentioning names, but we all know who they are, deliberately put out horrible, revolting opinions in order to get airtime and to get noticed. And they tend to be very loud. I actually think that I'm quite positive. I'm quite a positive, optimistic person. But I think people are generally speaking pretty optimistic and pretty open-minded. There's a fantastic book by Rutger Bregman called Humankind. And it opens with this question. Okay, I'll ask you this question, Tony, and your listeners can answer it too. Imagine there's a plane crash and the plane has landed, everybody's okay, but the pilot comes out and says, everybody off now, we're about to blow. 2 exits, front and back. On planet A, everybody stands up calmly. Some people help old people out first. The kids are taken, women are taken out first, and everybody moves out in an orderly manner, helping each other. On planet B, there's a mad panic. People are climbing over each other to get out, and people are being kicked back in, and people get out as fast as they can. Which planet do you think we live on?
Probably planet B.
All the evidence shows that in virtually every single occasion, it's planet A.
Really? Oh, okay.
And given the lockdown, given COVID, given the negativity of social media and some of these really horrid opinions and beliefs from some of these commentators, I needed that message. I really needed the message of that book to say, do you know what, as a race, we're actually quite nice.
Yes.
Most people are quite nice. The trouble is that, and this is kind of the theme of my book, The Vanishing Point, the trouble is that those people who would kick you out of the way to get off it, they tend to be the business and political leaders. They tend to be the ones that make it to the top and get to be in charge. And that's the problem with our society. They're the ones who are in charge, are the people who aren't actually very nice.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, very good point. Because you've only got to meet someone that you may have had contacts on, say, social media, but when you meet them, they might be, you know, a bit opinionated or whatever, but when you actually meet them, actually quite nice, ordinary people. I think it's just not a very good medium.
No, I would agree with that to a point, but on the other hand, you could argue, and I think it would be different for different people, but you could argue that's because on social media they let their mask down because they're not seeing the whites of your eyes.
Yes.
Which is the real person? Is it the one you're seeing on social media, or is it the one you're standing in front of when they are too afraid to say their opinions to your face? I don't know. I think it's different for different people. Right. But what I do know is that the world is a far more pleasant place than social media would have us. I love social media. You can manage it yourself. I love Twitter, @OvationChris. If anyone wants to come and say hello, I love it there. And I manage it by muting people who I think are horrible. And therefore I have a really positive time on there.
So Chris, the time's flown by. We're right near the end of the show now, but for anybody, any financial planner listening or any member of the public who's interested in financial well-being, this is the chance for you to make a plug for your own business. How should they get in touch with you in the initiative of financial well-being? What's the best way to do it?
So if they are financial advisory type people, paraplanners or anything like that, then IFW is the place. Just Google Initiative for Financial Wellbeing and come and say hi. Come and join. If you are interested, and if you're, I was going to say a human being, a person, you know, a normal person, not a financial advisor, who's interested in this topic, then check out, but you can buy the book, the Financial Wellbeing book, but also the podcast, which you will find on all your podcast providers. It's financialwell-being.co.uk is the website. But yeah, just go to your normal podcast provider and look up Financial Wellbeing Podcast.
Brilliant. Okay. Chris, I'm sad we have to come to the end of the show now, but I've personally found it very fascinating. Our own firm, Wealth and Tax Management, we're members of the Initiative of Financial Wellbeing, and we are we're seeking accreditation with you as we speak. So I do fully support what you do, and I found it very interesting, and I like to meet people that are passionate about what they do, want to make a difference, and you certainly are doing that, Chris. So
thank you, Tony.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good fun.
Time for this week's risk warning. This show is for general information only and is not intended to be individual advice. You are recommended to seek competent professional advice before taking any action.